بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونشكره على ما هدانا، ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of here and the hereafter. We praise Him and we thank Him for the continuous support that we receive from Him. Convey our greeting and salutation to the Holy Prophet of Islam, the most noble of all prophets, and his pure progenies. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our second lectures of the series, specifically resting on the issue of political participation within what we consider to be public space. Last week, I pointed out, starting with a hadith from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullah salamu alayhi, that stated, العالم بزمانه لا تهجم عليه اللوابس. A person who is well informed of his time will not be caught off guard by the suddenness of the event. And pointed out during the presentation that we Muslims cannot afford to be politically indifferent and neutral about what's going on in the political system within the United States, or for that matter in any other country. We should be present and take part. The first step is to be counted is to vote. And whether it is for the local, regional, or the national election. And the natural progression from there starts not only vote in the regional, national election and local election. We should put ourselves, become candidate to be elected, because I believe that if we were to be elected by simply being present in various offices, we can make these offices more sensitive to our experience. The first opportunity that is close by is a presidential election, which is the first week of November. That is going to present to us, and it is critical, pivotal for us to be participating. And until the situation change, we are stuck with what is called the two-party system. Two candidates being given the choice, one representing the Democratic Party and the other one representing the Republican Party. We, the voters, have to make a choice as which one to vote for. Granted, most of the time, you can look back to many decades, none of the candidates make promising choices, but here is the system. We have no other option but to vote accordingly. Now, since we have these two parties, I thought tonight I would focus on the history, a brief history of the Democratic Republican parties in the US. I believe this knowledge is necessary because if you want to go and vote for, say, any of these two candidates, you should possess some information about the background of the party itself, what are the values that they stand for, and how, which one would be more sensitive or less sensitive to our experience. Muslims made probably one of the biggest miscalculation in the year 2000. They could have been more lenient or at least rewarding the Democrat for some of their policies towards the Muslims. But instead, they opted for an unknown, Bush, and gambled on him. And we all know what happened once he became president. The neocons took responsibility, and the United States went to war that we still continue as a consequence. Now let us look at the history of these two parties. The modern political party system in the US has been dominated by the Democratic and the Republican parties, and every presidential election, since the upcoming one is a presidential election, we talk about it. Every presidential election has been won by the representative of one or the other party since 1852. And since 1956, one of the two parties have controlled the US Congress since then, 1956. At the moment, we are not interested to talk about the dynamics, how the party system evolved in the United States going back to the Federalist and the early establishment of the state, but we want to focus purely on the two parties, the Republican and the Democratic parties. Muslims have noticed that changes in the administration between either Democrat or Republican has had historical paradoxes for us. Let's choose, for the sake of argument, Middle East politics. We see that Middle East politics, both parties differ, or at least used to differ in the past, and then now, since at least 2000, we see a huge shift in the axis of the system, the political system, that there is hardly any difference between the Republican or the Democrat. When it comes to at least the end of the 20th century, the Republicans have been more inclined. I'm not saying that they have done it all the time. The Republican administration up to the end of the 20th century has been more inclined to stand up to Israel and to support the democracies up to 2000 than the Democrats. In 1956, it was the Republican President Eisenhower who forced the British, the French, and the Israeli occupation of part of Sinai in the 1956 attack, Suez War, against Egypt. It was first Bush who refused indirect use of American money to build illegal Jewish settlement on Palestinian-occupied land. And yet, the same George Bush organized the occupation of Iraq in 1991 as a consequence of Iraq-Kuwait invasion. Then we go to Democrat. In 1947, it was Henry Truman who gave green light for the establishment or the creation of a state of Israel on Palestinian land, setting in motion the stage for conflict and instability in Middle East ever since, close to 73 years. In 1967, it was Johnson's administration, a Democrat, who helped Israelis with the logistic and intelligence to occupy more Palestinian lands in Syria, West Bank, Gaza, and Golan Heights. US presidents have directly or indirectly supported building of settlement on Palestinian occupied land. If Clinton, which is a Democrat, was playing and toying with the idea of recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of so-called quote-unquote Jewish state, Look what happened, and he dropped it. Look what happened to what we have, the current administration. And what today, bringing in a couple of minor emirates from the Gulf state to prove the latter part of his administration that he has achieved peace in Middle East. The deal of the century flopped. Now they are bringing in two small nations that collectively they don't have much of a weight, political weight, to organize so-called peace treaty. We have gone through these various types of peace treaties before. So when it comes to foreign policy, the Republicans have, or they are a shade better or more sympathetic to the Muslims when it comes to foreign policy than the Democratic, up to 9/11. 9/11, some people say, changed everything. I tend to disagree. One thing that we as voters and Muslim community in general seem not to understand is the fact that we think one administration or one person is better than the other person. What we don't understand that there is a doctrine that dictates American foreign policy. And that doctrine is something which is continuously being applied and used by all presidents, at least since President Monroe. You go and go to Google, type in, say, Obama doctrine, Trump doctrine, Bush's doctrine, or Nixon's doctrine, or any other doctrines, they all come to the same thing. And I read this statement, which was made by one of the major figures within the administration, Democratic administration. It is the intention to dominate the world and to destroy any potential challenge to U.S. domination. That's the doctrine. So foreign policy in any shape or form is not based on some ethical, moral code that one could argue. Last year, or just about a year and a half ago, when I went to Iran, I was cornered by a number of so-called political science professors that they really did not have a clue about how the political system in the United States operate. They were all looking at it from far away, the lens of political system, of political science theories in the way they taught them at universities. And then they started reminding me of the contradiction, 1, 2, 3. When I reminded them about these doctrines that we have, everything United States does, whether it supports the crooks in the world or occasionally it doesn't, whether it supports the Israelis or whether it supports another puppet, the Saudis, or anything else, it rests on these doctrines of world domination. Everything else is irrelevant and redundant. For the United States to be dominant in the world, they make deal with crooks, and they may deal with corrupt regimes, they support corrupt regimes, etc., as we have seen them doing it in the Middle East. So, unfortunately, we really need to understand these facts as it happens, so that we don't become overly optimistic when an African-American president comes in or Trump administration. Muslim community, because they did not understand the reality, gave Michigan to the Republican Party in 2016. This is something that we really need to understand. Domestically, if we choose, there is a slight shift here between the Republican and the Democrat. The Democrats are considered to be the parties of the minority and the secular state. It is the party which is most likely, and I must emphasize, most likely to be sensitive to domestic diversity. If Muslims are discriminated against or harassed within the United States, they are more likely to come to the rescue than the Republican. But unfortunately, since 2000, that idea, that thought, that thesis have been thrown out, because we've seen everything that was organized by Bush, the Republican, George Bush, the Jr., by the Republican Party was continued during the Obama, the Democratic Party. And then the Republican added to it again. Since 9/11, Muslims and Arab profiling has been done by the Republican and the Democratic Party equally. Another issue that we really need to pay attention, this issue of Republicans to the right or Democrats to the left. We really need to dispense with the idea of left and right within American foreign politics, or at least American policy, political policy. It may have meant something as far in the 1960s, late 1960s and early 1970s. But unfortunately, the political party in the West, particularly United States, has shifted so much to the right that this right and left have become redundant. For the coming election, both the Democrat and the Republican will be on the right of center. It's nothing to do with anything else. So this we really need to understand. Another issue that we really need to pay attention to, that policies or the system, political political decisions and policies in the United States are systemic, not an individual. I had an argument during the days that I was teaching at the University of Denver regarding this issue, just beginning of Obama's election when he was candidate in, I believe, 2008, August 2008, and I made this clear. Some African-American professors rejected it. No, this is the first time in the history of the United States that we have an African-American candidate. Whether he would be elected or not, that's a different story. I made it clear. When we look at the American system, political decision-making, it is systemic. An individual comes as part of the system, not to change the system. Remember the concept of doctrine that I talked about? And I remember at that time, after 100 days, which we call it the honeymoon period for the new president, I wrote to every single professors, and I told them what happened. I received no reply. We have to understand how the political dynamics in the United States work. And the more we know, the more imperative it's become for us to participate for the decision making. The move to the right or the left is meaningless. And sometimes on one policy you get one party going slightly more extreme than the other, but there is no such thing as left or right for Muslims. And Muslims really need to understand this. They think, well, if we elect, say, we have the two dead meat in front of us, Trump on the one side, Biden on another. If you look at their history, when it comes to war in Iraq, Biden voted for it. Well, Trump wasn't there. But since then, Trump has done everything possible to destabilize Iraq, Syria, and all other wars. So here, the central underlying issue is to understand, for the American Muslims, is to organize and strategize themselves, not just for the upcoming election, which is in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks from now. We should have a plan how to organize ourselves. There are three fundamental interrelated dynamics that exist: the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive branches. Election starts with, we will not be able to change or influence any of these three branches if we stay away and become neutral to the election. The relationship of the legislature, the lawmaking. If there is a law that says every Muslim has to be stopped at the airport and questioned 6, 7 hours, and then until the plane, they miss a plane or the flight, and then sent back home. If there is a law, where is it going to be? It's the law-making machinery, the legislature. The judiciary, those are the lawyers or the Supreme Court and so on, judges that interpret the law. We have to be there as well. And naturally, ultimately, the executive, which is represents, embodies in the president position. Voting is part of the process. We cannot influence anywhere if we stay away and listen to the some kind of ideas that we shouldn't vote. It is haram, as they say. The logic of legal process is intertwined with the logic of the electoral process. If you want Congress not to organize or not to pass a law, our representatives must be there to create a block. If you want the legislative, or if you want the judiciary, our judges must be there. And ultimately, our presidents have to be there, our candidates have to be there. We need to understand the reality. We keep talking about, well, in every discourse that we have, we somehow lament the fact that we are not close to the Jewish community and their power. The American Jews have succeeded in making United States and its courts to be defender of the Jewish interests worldwide. How did they do it? By having a plan, organizing themselves. No rabbi stood up and says, or anybody else stood up and said, immediately they recognized the fact that if you want to influence, you have to be part of the process, at least to begin, until you create enough power base for yourself to be able to sway both parties one way or the other. Look at what's happening in the local election. Now we have judges, Muslim judges, both male and female. In local election, we have representatives. We can ask our representative, these are our sensitivities and our experience. We want something to be done about it. We need to start our political activities. This comes out part of the strategy that, inshallah, next week we will talk about. We should start our political activities at the local level. It has its advantages. First of all, the scope is small and can be dealt with. And this is where training takes place. We have two sisters within the house. Both of them started their work at the local level, becoming part of the public discourse. The training and creating political base takes place. Public platform is created and gradually expanded. So the gradual progression, you start with the local, then regional, and ultimately the national. There is no other choice, brothers and sisters. If you want your sensitivity, your experience, what you care about, to be part of the agenda to be discussed, you have to be at the table. If you are absent, somebody else would talk on your behalf, and they will not do even half as good as what we can do ourselves. Let's hope that, inshallah, as the time gets close, we have already organized ourselves. The first step, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, is to go out and vote en masse. And then we see how we can organize our affairs later on. May Allah bless you all. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.